I am super excited to introduce our guest tonight. I didn't really when you had me listening to his stuff early on, I was like, "Who is this?" I didn't get it, but now I have read his book, follow his ministry, listen to podcasts or things that he's on. It is the one. Now he don't know that I'm his niece.
Oh, he doesn't.
I don't think any of his family know that we related,
Okay.
but I call him Uncle Dr. Voddie.
Okay.
Yes, so we're gonna welcome on Dr. Voddie Baucham. Hello,
Hello.
hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm always happy to meet a new niece.
Yes. See, that's you are speaking my language already. Thank you so much. We know that you recently got in from Zambia and you have to be exhausted. So thank you for taking the time to sit with us and to have this conversation. Let's just start out from the jump. Tell for like the one person who might not know you, who was like me, like 2.5 years ago. Tell us about yourself and like the work that you're doing, where you live, because you don't even live here, which is awesome.
Yeah. Um, I'm Voddie Baucham. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I have been serving in Lusaka, Zambia for the last almost 7 years now. Went there to help start the African Christian University, working with the Reformed Baptist churches there in Zambia. I am the husband of one. Bridget and I have been married for 32 years in a row, and we have 9 children, and 7 of those still at home with us in Lusaka, and 3 grandchildren. And so that's me. I'm just a preacher who loves the Lord and loves preaching the gospel and loves uh, training the next generation and preparing them to do the same.
He said 32 years in a row. Won't he do it?
Yes,
Won't
he
he do
will.
it?
Yes, he
Yes.
will.
Yes. Okay, so you grew up in LA. I also grew up in LA. This is why I know. I'm like the family. Yes. So what part of LA did you grow up, and what was LA like, or what was your upbringing like?
Yeah. Um, People always ask me that. Los Angeles is one of those cities where, people from miles around will say that they're from Los Angeles, and then you probe them, and it's like Long Beach or whatever.
Right. That in LA.
I'm actually from LA, from South Central LA, and my parents went to Jefferson High School, and I lived over in the jungle over near Dorsey High School. So yeah, I'm from LA.
I was born in the jungle. My mama went to Dorsey High. Yes, yes, yes. Ooh,
My
let me.
niece.
Yeah, I told you. People don't believe it. They don't believe it, but it's true. Growing up, one, were you like, did your mama raise you in church? Was that like part of your upbringing? And like part
No.
B of this, I want to say it's like, did the streets influence your depiction of God at all?
Yeah, so no, I did not grow up in church. My mother had grown up in church, and then she rejected uh, Christianity and actually became a Buddhist. So I was raised in a Buddhist home. I was raised um, by a single mother. My mother and father got married. She had me when she was a senior in high school, I guess, and they got married because that's what you did. But they didn't stay married, so she raised me as a single mother, and I did not go to church. I was born in 1969, really, coming of age in the late 70s, early 80s, and LA it was the Wild West back then. It was the whole crack epidemic and everything else that was going on then. So when I got old enough to run into a little trouble, my mother shipped me out, and we got on a Greyhound bus for 3.5 days, and went from Los Angeles to Beaufort, South Carolina, where I spent the next year living with her oldest brother, who was a retired drill instructor in the Marine Corps. And I got out of trouble.
That would get you out of trouble. Yes.
Quick, fast, and in a
And in a
hurry.
hurry.
Yeah.
Don't play no games. Yes, yes. Wow. I think one, just what an even though I'm sure it was hard, what an awesome opportunity to be able to leave the streets of LA. Because I was born a little after you. But much of the streets hadn't changed. You know, the crack epidemic, I came along right, not at the height of the crack epidemic, but there was still a lot of crack going around in the streets. And, you know, that gang life and all of that was still very present there. And trying to navigate that as a young person was extremely difficult. So to be able to go somewhere where you can get guidance, and I don't know if was your uncle a Christian?
No, he wasn't. He was just, he was just a good dude.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he had that sort of wholesome, Southern upbringing.
Yeah.
My family, is from Texas, and they were from, West Texas. So, they had that wholesome church going upbringing, but nothing overtly or particularly Christian about my experience there either.
Then what shifted and brought you into a relationship with Jesus?
Well, I went to high school in San Antonio, and I played football there, and then went off to university and was playing football in the university. And a guy got wind of the fact that I was part of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which I really wasn't, but he thought I was. So he came to talk to me about starting a Bible study among the football team, and realized very quickly that I didn't know Jesus from the man in the moon. And so he started sharing the gospel with me, and he spent about 2.5 weeks just sharing with me because I didn't really get it. I didn't have enough of a foundation to really grasp what he was talking about. And he started with the basics. This is a Bible. He would answer my questions. Eventually, after a couple of weeks together, he would show me how to find answers to questions myself. And it was November 1987 when I realized that one day I didn't have any more questions. And he was late coming for our regular meeting. And I just laid down on the floor in the locker room after practice one day. And I remember just praying, Lord, that thing that you did for Steve that he's been telling me you want to do for me, now's good.
Mm.
And I mean, it was, from then on, just growing more and more in my faith, serving more and more, talking to people about Jesus, from the beginning. And I've been doing the same thing ever since.
So when I first met Monique, I think that one of the things I realized about her very early, because my background is in theology, and I had been doing a lot in the realm of theology and apologetics for a couple decades. But I assumed about Monique when we met, well, she's a Christian. We both graduated from Biola. We were both raised in Southern California. I was assuming we had a lot of things in common. And I soon realized that she saw her race in a very different way than I did. And she saw herself as, being Black first. And, being a Christian was important to her. She was a Christian, but it was not, being Black was very important to her. And I guess I'm just curious as to, I know with Monique's journey in rethinking things related to the critical social theories and rethinking her identity and coming from a place of I'm a Black Christian to I'm a Christian who happens to be Black. I'm wondering if that was ever part of your journey in your faith.
So you know how you have those pictures in your life, those old pictures that can, come back to haunt you and remind you of things that you'd rather forget. I have a picture of me in college. Again, I came to faith my first year in college, and I have a picture of me a couple of years later, um, where I'm wearing a shirt with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, Elijah Muhammad, and all this stuff on my T-shirt, because I absolutely was in that place where I was much more Afrocentric than Christocentric, at that point in my life, and it did take me a while to kind of recognize that, um, and then recognize that it was an issue, you know, that I was putting something ahead of Christ, that I was putting something ahead of my identity in Christ, and that was hugely problematic. And it took me a while to recognize that, and then longer still for me um, to kind of grow out of that, if you will.
Yes and amen. When you were asking the question, all I could hear was that song that says, "I'm black and I'm proud." And I was like, that used to be my life.
I'm black, y'all. And I'm
Yes.
black.
Yes, first.
Because
Um,
Monique,
but
your mother raised you to be very proud.
yes, when you were telling the story about your shirt, my mother actually gave me a shirt that had Nefertiti on it that said "Black woman, no sugar, no cream." So it was just but that was just the life. Like, you were raised to be proud to be black. There was nothing wrong with it. And so becoming a Christian, that part didn't leave me. Now I'm just a person who's black and proud and loves Jesus. you know? But how did you decouple that part of you, or did you? Do you find that was a need to decouple your ethnicity or your racial makeup from your identity as a child of God?
Yeah, not decouple, but prioritize,
Mm.
right? I don't think any of us are, is called to decouple that. I think that would be an affront, right? Because the God who made us made everything about us, and everything about us is important, in the economy of God, and brings beauty and glory. Uh, and so I absolutely was not about decoupling that, but really about prioritizing and recognizing that everything about me um, had to be subjected to Christ, and that Christ was indeed Lord over all, and before all in my life.
Hmm. That's good. I think that's helpful. Because, like, honestly, I think in the last probably 2 to 3 years, yeah, probably 3 years, wondering, like, well, how does this all fit together? I don't want to put anything before being a child of God, but my ethnic background is so important, and yeah, trying to line it up. So I like how you said that
To prioritize.
you prioritize it, and you're not, you're a child of God first.
Yeah.
Well, anyone who doesn't hate mother and father, and right, I mean, those are strong words from our Lord, and saying that about your mother and your father and your sister and your brother, I mean, most assuredly, um, that would also connect to and include your ethnicity and your culture and everything else, right? It is Christ before all and Christ above all. And what that also means, because here's the thing, my culture is fallen, right? Every culture is fallen. And if we're not careful, what we do is we fail to subject those fallen things about our culture or about our family, right? Um, to the lordship of Christ. And that's when we see syncretism. And we can't have that, right? let God be true and every man a liar, you know? So yeah, we have to prioritize.
When I think about South LA, Monique took me once to see the places where she grew up and the homes and the places where she would frequent. We went to the Slauson
Swap meet.
Slauson Swap Meet.
Swap meet.
Don't play no games. Yeah, they didn't change the name, call it a super mall. No, it's still a swap meet.
She took me to the place where she got stabbed. She took me to the place where she used to take the bus.
It was all the fun places.
Yeah.
Who was stabbed on this corner.
And but what struck me was how many churches there were in that area. A lot of very small storefront kinds of churches. And I asked Monique, how effective were these churches when you were growing up? Like how did people in the neighborhood think about these churches? And I guess I would love to ask you that question, is when you were growing up, what was your impression of all of these kinds of storefront churches? Is that how it was when you were growing up? And what was your impression of that as a young man?
Yeah, I didn't even notice them.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, didn't even notice them. And it was just not even part of my thinking. It just wasn't, they were there. But it just wasn't part of my thinking. Wasn't something that I even noticed.
Mm. I would say that, at least in my experience, there weren't a lot of interactions with these communities or like the churches and things like that. Maybe here and there, I think some churches started like daycares or elementary schools and things like that. But by and large, it was just, like homeschool, go to the park. You might be able to play on your street if your street was safe enough to play on. But the church didn't, I would say they didn't really influence the community.
Yeah. But there were so many churches
Mhm.
when you took me down there. It was interesting. I think that another thing.
But you gotta remember, for me too, there was a negative attitude toward the church. So my mother grew up in the church, like I said, and she rejected that. And there was a pretty significant Black Buddhist community. I always tell people, there's the movie, the Tina Turner movie. I think What's Love Got to Do with It, this particular movie. There's a scene in the movie where Ike beats her up for the last time. And she, fights him back, leaves, goes to her girlfriend's house who used to be a backup singer. And her girlfriend gets her to, kneel down in front of this sort of, box in her house. And it was a Gohanzen and there was a Buddha inside. That's how Tina Turner in LA around that same time became part of this same Buddhist community that my mother was a part of. And interestingly enough, my mother is, she's, I got a lot of, uncles and aunties, and they, in many ways, had rejected Christianity as well, but they went in different directions. And so they saw Christianity really as, I don't know how to put it. They didn't have a lot of respect for Christianity or for Christian ministers. And my mother was looking for something more spiritual, and she ended up in Buddhism. I had an uncle, for example, who was looking for something more militant, and so he ended up Nation of Islam. But there was this kind of thing happening within, the Black community in many urban settings at that period. There were people who were following Dr. King. There were people who were following Malcolm X, and then there are people who were, going off into other, sorts of movements, depending on what it is that they were looking for.
One of the things that I've read over the last couple of years is I want to call it like a Black exodus from church, especially women leaving the Black church, especially. But then you get these calls from other prominent Black leaders that Black people should leave, quote unquote, white evangelicalism and things like that. How do you, or do you see the, not just the Black church, but how do you see the church or leaders in the church speaking into issues of race or racism so that we can keep people in the pews? For me, especially Black people, I feel like, we see so many churches on each corner in many inner cities, but we're not going there. We're not going to church. We will go to the club. We will go to, do sage and burn sage and things like that, but we aren't necessarily running and flocking to Jesus. And then there's a call among some for us to leave the church entirely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's always going to be that. And like I was talking about before, the church had become such a political entity. And it's interesting in that scenario that I talked about with my mother and her siblings and her generation. Some of them look at the civil rights movement and they say, this is too political. I'm looking for something transcendent. That's my mother. And so she ends up in Buddhism because he didn't want to be a part of this political movement, especially when, there's the whole deep, dark secret that's not as much of a deep, dark secret anymore, about the sexual escapades, right, of these, these religious leaders in the civil rights movement, who were terrible philanderers and adulterers, and it wasn't a secret, right? So if you're looking for something, real spiritually, you go in that direction. And then there are other people who are like, enough with this nonviolent stuff. I'm going with the by any means necessary piece. But regardless of what was happening there, it was, we need to address these issues that are political issues and social issues. And it was not dealing with the ultimate issues in the heart of man. And so now the church becomes just one of many voices that's trying to address socio-political issues instead of being a transcendent voice. And I think we're seeing that again now with the social justice movement, right? Because people are saying, no, we got to fix ABC, XYZ. We gotta fix inequities, right?
Mm-hmm.
We gotta fix, racial injustice, so on and so forth. And so the church is preaching a different message, and it's not a transcendent message. The gospel of anti-racism is not a gospel, and that's hugely problematic.
Yes, the church looking to fix social issues and things like that, and switching out the gospel, like all of these things. My question, like if and I'm just gonna throw it out there because you're my uncle, and I know you got some wisdoms, but where is the voice of our leaders? Like, I hear your voice, but like I said, I hear Uncle Virgil and I hear Uncle Daryl when they Just Thinking podcast, check it out. But I hear them when they say, hey, look, Black liberation theology isn't the way to go, but it's creeping into your church. I hear you when you say there's a fault line and what side of the line you're gonna be standing on. But where are the other leaders who are not just calling out like racial stuff, but calling out sex stuff, calling out abuse, calling out abortion, like in all communities? Like, I feel like the church has really just either taken a back seat and then when you do speak out, and I don't know if you get this, but people write in and be like, she mean, like, why you got to say it like that? And it's like, well, would you like me to, pacify you into hell? Like, really, like, how do we have these hard conversations and call other leaders out? Because this is what I'm like, I look online on Twitter and I see prominent evangelical leaders, prominent ones that will tell you that the Bible isn't really the Bible. The Bible isn't what you need. can you help me think it through? Like, where are the people confronting the other leaders who are leading their people into another gospel?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, there are thousands of prophets who have not bowed the knee to Baal, right? Unfortunately, many of them don't have very high profiles. And that's due in part because we live in an era where there is an 11th commandment. And the 11th commandment is thou shalt be nice. And we don't believe the other 10, right?
Amen.
And so a lot of times people are marginalized. I, you know, I caught a lot of heat because I named names in fault lines. I wasn't mean, I wasn't castigating people. I didn't call their salvation into question. I cited statements and comments, right? And that's problematic for people. But so at first, the first thing I want to say though is there are many people out here who are doing things the right way. God always has a remnant. But a lot of those guys don't have time for social media, right? They're not doing that. Like you mentioned Twitter. I tell people all the time, people ask me, yeah, you got a Twitter, but I don't ever see you there. And I say, I'm not that sanctified. I don't know that I can make it, I don't know that I can hold on to my testimony if I was on Twitter every day, and
I hear you. I hear you.
And so that, they're just, not everybody has that temperament, and not everybody, is in, all those circles, but they're there. And what's interesting is I get that from people sometimes. People are like, well, you're just talking about, this, and you're critical race theory this and critical race theory that. And what's interesting is, I wrote a trilogy of books about, biblical manhood, womanhood, marriage, family, really calling people to recognize that, the gospel, it transforms us. And when it transforms us, it transforms the way that we live our lives within not only the community of the church, but the community of our homes. And that a lot of the ills that we're seeing and a lot of the problems that we're seeing are really problems that are rooted, right there. And so even I still have to say, even in my case, there are people who are saying, well, why are you talking about this and you don't talk about that? Well, I've been talking about all these things, for a long time, but people don't always listen.
One thing I'm wondering too, because I asked you the question about the church's impact when you were growing up, I guess I'm always also wondering when Monique first, we were first in dialogue, her position was that all cops are racist. And we used to really get into it about policing and her experiences with policing in South LA. I'm wondering, what your impression of law enforcement was. Did you have a positive impression when you were growing up? Was it mostly negative? Because I know that that's a big conversation for many in the Black community, and people might automatically think, that they know your position, but I'm not sure it's one that you've talked a lot about in a public conversation. And so I guess I just want to ask, like, how was that for you? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it's interesting growing up in the place that I did and the time that I did. I had a love-hate relationship with Popo, right? I was afraid of and intimidated by the LAPD, and that was their intention, right? That we be afraid of them and intimidated by them, and didn't like the police until stuff jumped off in the streets, and then I was happy to see them, right? And I think there's a lot of that, and I think it's hypocritical, to be honest, right? Everybody hates the police until you got to dial 911, right? And so that was my relationship. It was that kind of, love hate relationship, and I didn't like being stopped by the police or questioned by the police, or whatever. But at the same time, man, I recognized that I was living in a war zone, um, and that they had a part to play in that. So again, it was that love-hate relationship. And I will add this: it was later in life, and when I was in seminary, actually it was my last year at university. There was a guy who had come back to school. He was a police officer. He was a police sergeant. His name was Paul Labonte. I'll never forget Paul. He's gone on to be with the Lord now. But yeah, he was back in school and studying for the ministry, and that really had an impact on me. Having a relationship with him, and having him as a friend and brother, and having conversations with him about his life and his work and what it was like, and for the first time, just being able to comprehend what it meant to put on the badge and put on the uniform and have as your goal to just make it home at the end of every day. That really changed a lot of things for me.
I guess I'm wondering then, as after writing Fault Lines, I know that Monique gets a lot of criticism. She gets a lot of heat, where people will tell her, and I've just wondered if anyone's ever said something like this to you. They'll say, well, your ministry is just about protecting white people. Your ministry is just about letting white people off the hook for racism. And I'm wondering if you've ever had that criticism and what thoughts you have about that, because I know Monique's got 4 or 5 thoughts about it.
Yeah. It's always really interesting, when people will say, you're just currying favor with white people. You just want to let, white people off the hook. And I'm just thinking, like, 2 things. Number one, do you even know me? Right? You must not know me. You must not be aware of my ministry over the last 3 decades. Letting people off the hook is just not what I'm characterized by, right? I'm the guy. It's interesting, just a couple of decades ago, I'm the guy who was a pariah because I was arguing against systematic age-graded ministries. I was arguing that the way we've created youth ministry and children's ministry and all this stuff was unbiblical, which was absolutely not currying favor with white people in any way, or
Right.
Black people or anybody else, right? I'm the guy who's been advocating for Christians to get their kids out of public school and give them a Christian education. White folks weren't happy about that, right? Because 85% of, Christians send their kids to government schools. And so I've never tried to curry favor with anybody. And I've been a lightning rod for a long time. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to curry favor with white people. But then here's the second part of the irony, right? All of a sudden, at this point in my life, I'm going to decide I want to curry favor with white people. So I moved to Africa to do it.
Yes.
That dog won't hunt.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But
for all of the 3 white people that are, I think I know 2 of them. Yes.
But I think that another common misconception that people have about Monique, that she's a racism denier. And because she's not for an advocate of critical race theory, well, then she must be a racism denier. I'm wondering if you've had that accusation against you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a straw man, right? And it is the classic straw man of critical race theory. People are saying that critical race theory is just being honest and accurate about America's racist past. Well, that's a lie from the pit of hell. Critical race theory is an ideology. And I would argue that critical race theory is a theology, right? It is a perspective about racism, right? Not just the idea of teaching about racism. And the other thing is, the reason that people say that is because they've done a bait and switch. So what you do is you change the definition of racism. Literally, the dictionaries have changed the definition of racism over the last decade to where you go from racism being about prejudice towards groups of people, stereotypes and prejudices towards groups of people. We've now redefined racism to where racism is first prejudice plus power. And then racism is a manifestation of white supremacy that creates inequities, right? So on and so forth. So what we do is we move the goalpost, right? We shift the Overton window and we redefine racism so that people who are talking about the traditional definition of racism as racism are being accused of denying racism because they're not talking about the new definition of racism, which is actually a product of a Marxist critical theory getting its foot in the door, right? And so I just don't play that game, you know? I don't do that. I hold people's feet to the fire, right? And I say, if you're going to make that accusation, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to define your terms, right? I may be denying racism depending on how you're defining racism. And you may be denying racism depending on how you're defining racism. So let's define our terms. And what I find is that for the most part, people can't define their terms. Or when you nail them down to their terms, then they can't give you concrete examples of what they're talking about. So for me, I mean, I don't play that game. I get too much gray in my beard for you to be shaming me, you know, into saying that I'm this when I know that I'm not.
Hey,
And the other thing about that is, like, I know who I am, and I know that no matter what you think about me, the truth is more than likely something worse, right? Like the worst thing that you think about me is not the worst thing about me. That's the worst thing you think about me because you don't know me. If you knew me, you'd know there's worse. And so I couldn't care less about you mischaracterizing, you know, things about me, right? You come at me with something that's real, I'll own it. But you make stuff up. You know, I got enough stuff to deal with in my life and be sanctified about, you know, for me to be worried about stuff that you making up. You know, I don't have time for that.
yes. Ooh, goodness. Um, in relation to race and the church, what do you think that the church is doing right? And where do you see us having room to grow?
Yeah. Well, you know, I, eh, and even more so in recent years, am really careful about that term, you know, the church.
Mm,
Uh, because there are churches that do very well on this issue and a bunch of other issues, and there are churches that do very poorly. The other thing is that not every church is called to the same thing. There are some churches and some Christians. I mean, for example, you know, I, I give you an example. We're a pro-life family. I mean, we are absolutely a pro-life family. I've been involved in the pro-life movement for decades. You know, we're an adoptive family. I tell people that, you know, we were involved in the pro-life movement for so long that we went from telling people, give your baby life to telling them, give your baby to us, you know? And so we're a pro-life family, we're an adopted family. That's important to us. But we don't believe that everybody is called to that, right? We don't believe that everybody is called to respond to it the same way that we respond to it. And there are other people who are involved in things that are very significant. You know, there are people over there who are, you know, giving themselves and giving their lives to, you know, sex trafficking, for example.
mm,
And when we run into problems as Christians, is when we see our thing as the only thing and believe that all Christians are to be judged by the standard that we set based on what the Lord has put on our plate, right? And I think what we're doing now is we're doing that about race, right? And we're saying that race is everything. It's the only thing. And anybody who doesn't have this in the forefront is not a real Christian, is not a serious Christian, so on and so forth. And nothing could be further from the truth. And here's one way that I found to make that point to people, even to people who are just up in arms about race and racial, justice and, whatever they want to define that as. Here's one thing that I say, do you realize that there are more slaves in the world today than there've ever been? Like sure enough, for real, slaves. Slavery is alive and well today. And what I find interesting is that people get on their moral high horse because they want justice for people who've never been slaves because of what happened to their ancestors generations ago.
Mm-hmm.
And these same people couldn't care less about people who are literally in slavery today.
That's good. That's real good. And I think that's something that you would ask me when we first started talking is, why does everybody have to care about race? And for me, it was justice. Why is everybody's call have to be to social justice?
She wanted everybody to be just as passionate about justice as she was. And I definitely think that God, one of the unique things that God put in your heart, the way that he made you, is that you came out of your mother just caring about justice, being passionate about it. And I think that that's why the enemy hijacked it for so long, is that, the enemy had you entrapped in this kind of counterfeit version of justice, because that was part of how God made you. And your pretend friends when you were a child.
You ain't got to bring my imaginary friends into this.
Were orphans.
They
you
really
wanted
were.
to run an adoption agency, and that was just how God made you. And I think that that's what made it such an easy thing for the devil to kind of lead you into this counterfeit. So it wasn't that your heart for justice was bad, but you really thought that
Jesus was a social worker. Yes, I did.
My problem was I wasn't as passionate about the same issues as you were.
Because Jesus was all about social justice.
I know. We used to have these conversations.
So listen, when I was in at university, I was at Rice University. I was playing football at Rice University. God calls me to preach. And long story short, I transfer, my senior year from Rice University to Houston Baptist University. And I went from, being on a football scholarship to having to pay for school. And so I got a job. By the way, I was married, already had a daughter. And so I had a job. And what did I do? I went into social work. I worked at a group home. And then when I went to seminary, and in Fort Worth, I worked at a group home, and was working in social work at the time. So that's another thing that it's so ironic. Number one, people say, I must have grown up privileged. That one makes me chuckle. The other one is I must have grown up, not in a Black, community or neighborhood or whatever. That one makes me go beyond chuckling to just right out laughing, and then the other one is, not concerned, about the plight of Black people and whatnot. And so, I started the Black Student Fellowship at Houston Baptist University. My first several jobs before I, started working in full-time ministry were in social work and in group homes, working in minority communities. And so it is just not true to say that I'm not concerned about justice and haven't always been concerned about justice or about the plight, of people who look like me. It's just that I understand the nature of that plight differently. if nothing happens with the police, if nothing happens, with, whatever affirmative action and set asides and reparations and this, that, if nothing is ever done by anyone, we will dramatically improve the plight of Black people if we preach the gospel and apply the gospel in the area of biblical manhood, womanhood, marriage, and family. It will be transformational without the government doing a single thing.
I think what I've been wrestling with the Lord for a couple of days, maybe a week now, is about courage and boldness and looking to, like I said earlier, like to leaders to speak out. And I feel like the Lord has given us a platform, and we use our voice, our vote, and our dollar, like to promote those things that are good, true, and beautiful, that are godly. Um, and yet we also get the letters in from pastors who are like, "There's no way I could." Well, we just did a podcast earlier this week about orange curriculum in children's ministry and how that leads down a road of secular humanism. Um, and pastors write in, they're like, I can't take away the orange curriculum, or I can't say this to my congregation. What would your encouragement be to pastors who really do, they really want to lead well, but may struggle in the aspects of courage or boldness, not because they don't want to do right, not because they don't want to love the Lord with all their heart and to disciple others, but there might be a struggle there in regards to that courage aspect.
You know, I think we all struggle with that. Um, I think a lot of people assume, for example, that I just like to fight, right? And I just like to go to war over stuff. And I really don't. I don't like being spoken ill of. I don't like being attacked. I don't like being, I don't like being at odds with people. I don't get a kick out of that. Um, but at the same time, um, we have to come to a place where we trust the Lord. And I think for me, what happened is, I took some principled stands early, um, and ended up getting fired a couple of times. And I survived, you know? And I think that had an impact, on me, having that experience where, I mean, what are they going to do? Fire me? Yes, they'll fire me. And they got fired. And that's never, a convenient thing to experience. But I'm okay. You know, my first publishing, uh, my first publishing contract was with Lifeway. And I got blacklisted at Lifeway. A lot of people don't know that, but I took a principled stand as an author with Lifeway, and I got blacklisted at Lifeway. I had a 3 book contract, and I had finished 1 book, and they basically blacklisted me, and like, your publishing career is over. Um, but the Lord took care of that, right? The Lord took care of that, and I think that um, we need to trust that the Lord will take care of us when we take principled stands. And I think we need to encourage one another in that. The other thing is, I think we need to be wise, right? Wise as serpents and innocent as doves, and there's a way to do this. So sometimes, as my uncle would say, you got to go real slow, like a woodpecker with a headache, um, and I think sometimes that's the way we have to approach these things. There's something between being a coward who says nothing and being an idiot who's fighting all the time, right? And I think we need to find out where on that spectrum we need to be for any given issue. And not every hill is a hill to die on.
Wow. That's
some good advice.
It is not every hill.
Yeah.
Man.
Thank you so much for making time for us. I know you're so busy. It's just such an honor to be able to finally sit down with you. And I just want to.
This was a blast.
Oh, good.
This was awesome. I love what you guys do. I was so excited, when this opportunity came up, and I just want to encourage you ladies. You're doing the Lord's work, and I'm proud of you. I'm happy for you. I'm happy to have had this opportunity, and I'm happy to count you among friends and co-laborers, and I'll go back to back with you in Foxhole any day.
Thank you. Yes, and I am one that does like a good scrap. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. But thank you so much. Please get some rest. We know that you're speaking again, I think throughout the weekend.
Yeah.
So thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
God bless.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.